I have to pick this up now because there's something I have to read. All right. My personal mission statement is what I want to talk about first. I have a personal mission statement. It's to create joy and make a difference in the world. That's my personal mission statement. I've had it for years. And I think we all have the potential for meaning in our lives. And we need to discover what that is. So I challenge all of you to create a personal mission statement. And by the end of the night, I hope that I've inspired you enough to accept my challenge. And again, as I said, my mission statement is to create joy and make a difference in the world. So, in June of this year, I was dealing with some bad stuff from the cancer. My stomach was bloated. I had fluid. God, how many liters was it total? 9 liters of fluid. Was that right, Dawn? Do you remember?
4.
And my stomach was 4, and I think my lungs were like 3 or something. But I had a whole bunch of fluid in my body. And I'd gone in for my second chemo. Oh, by the way, and I was living in Krakow, Poland. So I'm dealing with cancer in Poland. Fun place because I don't speak Polish. But I was living in Poland for a while, which I'll talk about that later. And so I had to go to the hospital, and it was the Jean Paul II hospital, which is kind of weird right there because I'm not Catholic, but he was a pope for a while. And so I go to the hospital and on a Wednesday, and they start working on me, and they start draining the fluid. And then things get kind of weird because then I remember the fluid coming out of my stomach and out of my lungs. I remember being in their version of ICU. My doctor came by and talked to me. He did speak English, thank the gods. And so we had a nice chat. And then I don't remember anything else for a while. And I have my phone next to me, of course, because we all carry our phones nowadays everywhere. And I wake up, and it's early. It's obviously early in the morning. And I wake up, and the first thing I do is I reach my phone, because I'm like, oh, what, remember I got here on Wednesday, so I'm thinking, oh, maybe I fell asleep. It's Thursday morning. And I look, and it's Friday. And I have no memory of a whole fucking day. And I look at my phone, and it's 6:30 in the morning on a Friday, and I'm like, well, shit. And I pop open the Facebook, because that's what you do, right? And I may be a boomer, but I am a up-and-coming social media boomer. So I pop open the Facebook, and there's 600 plus fucking condolences for my death. And, okay, I'll just admit it, I did not read all 600. I'm just going to let you guys know that right now I could not read them all. I did read a few. And I'm looking at this, and I'm like, what the fuck? What happened? And so I'm really tired because, well, I wasn't in a coma, but I was out of it for 24 hours. That I didn't know that. And I just wrote, I am not dead, and I fell back asleep. And, which was good because, there's a time difference here, but people found that out pretty fast that I wasn't dead. And I will go in more detail about this later on. So then I woke up again, and then I made a little video, and I sent it off to my friends, and I got to quote Mark Twain, "The rumor of my demise has been highly exaggerated." And I was like, holy shit, that's amazing. I was dead for 24 hours. At least that's what everybody thought. Now, I know you guys all have one really important question that you want to ask right now. What in the hell were you doing in Poland? Right? That's what you want to know. No, you don't. But I'm going to tell you how I got to Poland and how I reached that point by telling you a bit about my life, the past 66 years. So get ready for just a little teaser journey of Allena's amazing, albeit sometimes very weird and scary life. So I was born in Crescent City, California, at Seaside Hospital in 1953. My mother was 16, and my father was in his early 20s. I don't remember exactly how old he was. My mother and father did not have to get married because my mother married my father when she was 14. I just want you to all think about that. It was pretty fucked up, really. My dad thought she was 18 when he proposed, but he knew she was 14 when he married her, and he still married her. Shortly after my birth, my parents divorced, and my father got custody of me, and we moved to Idaho. And I was never allowed to have contact with or see my birth mother. My father then, when I was 3, married an 18-year-old girl. You can see a pattern here. An 18-year-old girl who didn't have any children or siblings in her life. She was an only child, farm girl. And she became the mother of a 3-year-old little girl, and shortly got pregnant a couple times, and gave me a sister and a brother. So I grew up in Nampa, Idaho. Now, those of you who have never been to Idaho, Idaho's a little strange. It's a little stranger now than it was. It's way more conservative. It wasn't quite so conservative when I was there, but it's a strange place to grow up. Small town. We were the 5th largest town in Idaho, and it was 22,000 people. So that's what I grew up with. I grew up in a town where we had very few, our minorities were Hispanic and Japanese because of the internment camps, which is a very interesting way to grow up. And I thrived because the one really awesome thing about my stepmother is she took me to the library every 2 weeks, and she let me check out as many books as I could read in 2 weeks. And I checked out 10 to 14 books every 2 weeks. And I read a book a day almost. And thanks to her, I learned a lot about the world that I wouldn't, because by the way, I learned to read at 3. My uncle taught me to read. So because I learned to read so young, I was reading 5 to 6 years ahead of myself. So I'm finding things out about the world that most 6, 7-year-olds didn't know about. And I'm learning lots of stuff. So this was the start of my really crazy life. So I'm going to skip around a lot, but one of the things I'm going to talk to you about now is how I had my first orgasm. Because one of the reasons, those of you who don't know me, I've been nicknamed the sex-positive mom of Seattle or the kinky mom of Seattle. My life evolves around sexuality. And so I'm going to talk a lot about sexuality. So I'm 10 years old. I'm in the 4th grade, and you know those ropes that you can climb? I climbed this rope. I used to climb ropes all the time, but this time, when I got to the top of the rope, I almost fell off because my whole body went, and I'm like, wow, that's amazing. And I had no idea what happened. I just knew that my body felt really, really good. And sadly, I couldn't climb a rope again because the recess bell rang and I had to go in. And I'm like, oh God, how am I going to do that? That felt really good. So I got home, and now I shared a bedroom with my brother and my sister. And even though I didn't realize I was masturbating, I knew I needed to be quiet. And so I quietly, with my body, and guess what? I gave myself an orgasm. And I did it the next night, and the next night, and the next night. And then, I forgot to tell you, I was raised fundamentalist Christian. My parents, my stepmother was First Baptist, which is liberal Baptist. My father was a Pentecostal, Assembly of God. So I was raised First Baptist and Pentecostal. I went to the First Baptist Church with Laverne, and then I saw Oral Roberts heal the sick with my grandma. So I've done it all. I've seen it all. But I was raised in a fairly strict religious family. And it dawned on me one day that what I was doing by touching my private areas, my pussy, I was doing a sin. And so I stopped. And I became celibate remember I'm 10. I became celibate with myself. I no longer had a relation with myself for about a month. And then I went, oh, screw that. And I continued to masturbate for the rest of my life. And quietly, right? Or at least back then it was quiet. And so my childhood was rough. My father, bless his heart, my father meant well. I'm going to say this right now. My father meant well. My father loved me, and my father was abusive. My father, until my little brother was old enough to be the boy, because I was quite a tomboy, I was the boy. I went hunting and fishing with my dad. I did all kinds of great things with him. Rode horses. I was quite the cowgirl. And my father used to beat me on a pretty regular basis. His favorite saying was, quit crying or I'll give you something to cry about. So I learned not to cry. And it was, and I did. I completely shut off tears. Because if I cried, and I tell you what, when you're hormonal and the tears start coming at 12, 13, I started my period at 13 years old in a camper with the whole family, like all my uncles and all that stuff. And my fucking father told my uncle, and my uncle told my other uncle, and my aunt told my uncle, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, you're a woman now. It was the most embarrassing day of my life. But that was my family. They were weird, and like all families are. But the reality is that I grew up in a pretty unpleasant home. So when I was 16, I ran away. And they caught me. Well, partly they caught me because I ran away with my boyfriend who was only 14. I do like younger men. And my girlfriend, Cheryl, who was my age, and she went along to help keep my, help make sure that I didn't have sex with Jimmy. I don't know. It was like weird. It was just a really weird thing. But the three of us ran away together. And we made it all the way to Arizona from Idaho. Middle of winter, we almost got stuck in the snow in Yellowstone. We went up through Montana because we didn't want him to think we were going to Mexico because that's where we were headed. And we made it all the way to Arizona, and the car broke down because it was a $50 Studebaker I'd paid $50 for. And so we ended up in Kanab, Utah. And Jimmy Piper, my first boyfriend, he couldn't handle the responsibility of two women being responsible for us. He felt really responsible. He was only 14. So he went in to get a Coke in a restaurant. We didn't have much money left. And there was a police officer in there, and he turned us in. So I got knabbed in Kanab, Utah. Yeah. And after that, my father was way more distant because he came and got me and Cheryl. And, we went home. And my little brother, Chris, hardly spoke to me because he adored my dad so much, and I understand I broke my dad's heart by running away from home. And Chris was like 8 at the time. We fixed that, but it was really hard. And so I was hating living at home. And at 16, then I got really religious and carried a Bible to school and spoke in tongues for when I was 16, because I went from running away from home to becoming super religious. I went to the Foursquare Gospel Church, and I ended up speaking in tongues. And because you got 20 people or 10 hands laying on you, energy comes through you somewhere. Something's got to give. So I was like, Simbidiatum, blah, yeah. And 6 months later, I was reading tarot cards and reading people's palms and stuff. I kind of went back and forth to a lot. Also at 16 is when I discovered sex. Not PV sex. Penis and vagina sex was while coming, partly because the first guy I tried to have sex with was built like a beer can. I mean, his penis looked kind of like that. And there was no way it would fit in my pussy. So he taught me how to give head. So my nickname was Snake Lady for many years because I learned how to give really good head thanks to him. He's a biker too. He's so hot. Anyhow, that's another story. But I started having sex. I started getting high. I started doing drugs. I started embracing my hippie. This is in the late 60s, so hippie dippy time, right? And I became a hippie girl. And of course, I'm in Idaho, so there's not a lot of hippies. But guess what? I could find pot anywhere, and I did. And acid. Oh, that was my favorite drug of choice, LSD. I remember one time my dad was going fishing, and I had to come and tell him goodbye because he was going for a week. And I'm talking to my dad, and I'm high on acid, and I'm peeking. And I look at the ground, and this hole opens up under him, and I'm like, oh, shit, he's going to fall in. Oh, no, I'm on acid. It was the weirdest day ever. But I became a hippie, started doing drugs, started having a good time. When I was 18, I broke a couple big rules, such as I left for the weekend and didn't tell my father where I was going. I was still in high school. This is before I graduated. I just turned 18. I get home from this little weekend away with a really hot guy, and my dad walks into the bathroom as I'm brushing my teeth that night, and he says, your mom and I have been talking, and that time my stepmother walks in, and she says, you're a bad influence on your brother and sister. We want you out of here. And I got kicked out of the house. I was still in high school. So my dad, to his credit, he paid for my rent. I had a little tiny 1-bedroom apartment, cost me $60 a month. This was in 1970, so 71. And I continued, and I made it through high school. I actually continued to go to school. I will have to admit that I was not the best student by then. I went from being an honor society student to getting my first F that quarter because I really didn't care. And I almost got arrested. This was why I left Idaho for good. I used to have parties at my place, and lots of parties, because I was the only girl in town with her own apartment in high school. It was unheard of in 1971. And one of my best friends, Shelley, was 16, and she used to come over and hang out with me, and she was on probation. And one day, Red, that was a probation officer, comes in to pick her up from my place, because he figured that's where she was at again. And the neighbor next door looks at me, because I'm standing out on the porch. He's an old dude. And he looks at Red, and he goes, "Is that the madam of the house?" And he points at me. And I'm like, "What?" And at that time, I still had not had, I just had my first PV sex, penis and vagina sex, like the week before. So, I mean, this was like, I'm like, "Madam of the house?" Yeah, I shrugged it off. 2 weeks later, it was the last week of school, just before the graduation ceremonies. School had just ended. A friend of mine, Larry, comes running into my place going, "Allena, you got to get the fuck out of town." I'm like, "Why? Why do I have to get out of town?" He says, "Well, I spent the night in jail." Now, Nampa, Idaho's jails are really tiny, so if you spend the night in jail, you hear everything. And he goes, "I spent the night in jail last night," and he says, "They're writing up papers, they're gonna come and arrest you." I'm like, "Holy shit, for what?" He goes, "For drugs." I'm like, "Oh, yeah," click. "Contributing to minors." Well, I was 18, my friends were 16. Oh, yeah, click. "And prostitution." And I went, "What? Prostitution?" He goes, "Yeah." And I realized that I really needed to leave because I didn't really want to get arrested. My father was a local businessman. It would have destroyed him. It just didn't work. So I called up a good friend of mine. I'm like, "Here, come and take all my stuff. Take it to my parents. Do whatever you want with it." I put on a backpack. Another friend of mine had a motorcycle. I said, "Get me the fuck out of town." And we took off. And I ended up in southern Washington. I had a former boyfriend had been down there. I went and found Michael. And I ended up living in a commune, which for a hippie chick was kind of cool. So I spent the